Rose LeMay is a Tlingit woman from the Taku River Tlingit First Nation in northern British Columbia, and she's the author of this year's Canadian bestseller, Ally is a Verb. LeMay is a champion for inclusion of Indigenous peoples, and her book outlines a number of ways which non-Indigenous people can ally with, can actively engage with the history and lived experiences of Indigenous peoples. It's a relatively quick read, and much of the work helps Canadians better understand the role of boarding schools in Canada, a traumatizing experience of forced assimilation that the country has come to recognize but has been slower to actionably reconcile. Now, before we set that history aside, while LeMay's book outlines that awful chapter in history only recently passed, it's important to realize that a similar boarding school history was equally alive in U.S. history, unarguably for about 100 years from the late 1800s, but similarly, schools go back nearly 300 years on what is now U.S. governance. Some say reconciliation is an empty word, because the dictionary meaning of it suggests a rebuilding of relationships between Indigenous people and settlers, but there was no such relationship to begin with. Some say reconciliation is irrelevant, because governments are not doing enough of it fast enough. Some say reconciliation is a conundrum, because it is a call for human rights in a country that prides itself on defending human rights, yet doesn't do it at home. Some see reconciliation as a call to action as required by the TRC, Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Some see reconciliation as their personal responsibility to Indigenous neighbors. Some people find it confusing to know who is supposed to do reconciliation and what it will look like when we're done. Here's the Coles Notes version. Reconciliation is up to non-Indigenous Canadians from coast to coast to coast to learn enough about the reasons why it is needed, to learn about the different inequities facing Indigenous people, and then to do their part for reconciliation by fixing those inequities. We will know that we are getting close to being done when Indigenous people have similar health and well-being outcomes as any other group in Canada, and when Canada is proud to be an Indigenous country. And while LeMay spends time talking about the continued absence of government laws and corporate reform, she makes this part for readers like us clear. But herein also lies the secret power of Canadians from coast to coast to coast. Canadians don't need governments to tell them to do the right thing for Indigenous neighbors. Canadians are the leaders in reconciliation. Individuals influence their book clubs to read Indigenous authors, take their families to powwows to learn from Indigenous neighbors, watch Indigenous-directed movies, and walk alongside Indigenous people to demonstrate for Indigenous human rights. Now, this call to action seems small enough on its own, and I might summarize it first in a phrase which is much used amongst the First Nations people. Truth before reconciliation. Learn the truth, and learn it by immersing ourselves in the stories of the people themselves. LeMay writes, "This is my theory of reconciliation. Reconciliation relies on individuals choosing to learn more about Canada's history of genocide and working through the pain that new knowledge can sometimes bring. But reconciliation doesn't stop there. It must continue. Just like athletes practice and deepen skills for their sport, allies must also deepen knowledge and skills to make change. You must learn about the traumatic histories endured by Indigenous people, because the more knowledge you have, the more opportunity you will see to take your place in fixing those inequities, including how to see and challenge racism against Indigenous people. You learn and practice how to be a change agent. Reconciliation relies on you learning more to do better. The more we build up an army of allies for reconciliation, the more pressure we can put on governments of all stripes to fulfill their responsibilities for reconciliation. We need allies with the knowledge, commitment, and capacity to practice their influence daily and join the team to make real change in this country." LeMay's book is designed for most readers new to the work of allies and to the history of the indigenous peoples beyond the short shrift they received in schools. What isn't here is a more in-depth look at that history. She demands that we research more still. Much of anything outside of Canada, U.S. readers will have to make the short jump to read their own history, and very many specific actions allies can take now, because these are based on the changing local needs of the people around you. But there is one overall strategy that appears over and over, and it's the most important. Learn the narratives and then spread them.